Hey Stampers, Kim from StampingImperfection.com. Thanks for joining me today. I want to share with you 3 different ways to use watercolor pencils. And I'm playing around with watercolor pencils because I got a new set of watercolor pencils. I shared a video a few days ago unboxing a card kit I got from the Hedgehog Hollow, and in that card kit I got a set of 12 watercolor pencils from Marvy, and here they are. And so I've been playing around with them. You can already tell I've been playing around with them, but I'm starting with my set of 12 Marvy watercolor pencils, and I'm going to use the Strathmore watercolor paper. This was watercolor paper I got on sale at Michael's. It was buy one get one 50% off or something, so it was a good deal. I'm also going to use a stamp set that I got from a previous Hedgehog Hollow kit. I can't remember what month this is, but in this kit they paired with waffle flour, and I got a stamp set called Waffle Flower Sweet Ice Cream Stamp Set, and it's very cute. It's got these little mice and all kinds of ice cream treats and a couple cute sentiments, so I'm going to use that for this card. And just because I just wanted some cute images to color in, and I'm going to color them in with 3 different techniques. So I've got my Misty all set. I've actually already been playing with this. I'm taking a piece of this watercolor paper, and there were 12 sheets in there, and I cut them down. I just cut them in half, so that gave me, so each sheet gives me 2 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch pieces of watercolor cardstock to use. Now I actually want to make sure on this, I'm actually going to put the smooth side up, because since I'm stamping on this, watercolor paper has texture to it, so I want to use the side that's the smoothest on this particular project. And I'm going to use, to do this, I need ink that isn't going to be affected by the water. Generally I have an Altenew permanent black ink that I love. I use that for everything. But one of the Hedgehog Hollow kits I got had these 4 hybrid ink stamp cubes, these ink cubes, and they're from LDRS Creative. I believe it's Little Darling Rubber Stamp Company. And the hybrid inks you are supposed to be able to use with watercolors and with alcohol ink. So hybrid inks are pretty versatile. So I'm going to use this black one, and they actually call it Raven. Excuse me. So I'm just going to ink these up, and I'm using my Misty because I want to be able to like re-ink it. Usually with watercolor paper it takes at least 2 inkings for me to get a good image. And so I'm going to do 3 of the mice because I have 3 different techniques I want to show you. So I just got black ink all over my finger. Wipe that off while it's still wet. And this comes out remarkably well on this paper. I'm just going to give it one more inking to be really... I'm going to need to do a good cleaning job on my Misty here when I'm done. There we go. Very nice. Now, one thing I do have to say is this ink stays wet for a while, so I always heat set this with my heat tool. So I'm just going to heat set this. First technique that I use, this is the first technique I ever learned with colored pencils. Now these are watercolor pencils, so these are watercolor colored pencils. And the first technique I ever learned was to create a palette. This is watercolor. This is just a piece of scrap watercolor paper. It's probably not even the same brand. And I'm going to use my one of my aqua pens. It doesn't matter what aqua pen, find an aqua pen that you love and use that. Alright, and what I've done here is, I've actually already used this, and I just took my pencils and I scribbled on with each one of my pencils. Oops, this one, yes. And I just did this for each color. And as I was doing this, I realized that I really like these. I'm only going to do the ones that I used before. I don't have to redo the other ones. And I probably had enough color on there to do these. But I did that for each one. And this creates a palette. So this is actually kind of a nice, quick, and easy way to create your own palette. Now when I'm done coloring my image, I will not get rid of this. I will actually let this dry and stick it in with my colored pencils, and I will have this palette that I can use anytime, because I can either color over the ones that I used or generally reactivate them with a little bit of water. Okay, so with my aqua pen, I've gone to the sink. These, remember, unscrew. You just put them under the sink, fill them with water, or you can fill them from a water bottle or a squirt bottle, whatever works. And then I generally squeeze out a little bit of water. I like to have it on my, a little bit on my, this is my Teflon mat, so I like to have a little bit of that. And then I can just take some of the color from this palette and just start coloring in. Now, one of the things with this technique, I actually find it easier to lay down the color and then let it dry a little bit and go back and lay down a little more color where I want it to be a little bit darker. That's what I tend to do, doing it this way. So I'm just going to color in all the spots I want to be gray. I'm not trying to shade it or anything. What I'll do is give it a little time to dry, since I'm not using a ton of water. Now, oops, just lost my little puddle there. So now I'm just going to squeeze a little bit of water through, and usually I use a paper towel for this. I just happen to have this sitting here, so, and I'll wipe that till it's fairly clear, until the water runs clear, and then I can move on to my next color. So let's say I want to give this guy a little blue shirt. I can then take the blue color. I'm going to do the same thing. I like this technique because it's just so quick and easy. Plus, like, I can create a little palette, and that's pretty portable. If I, have to, like, take the kids somewhere and then sit and wait for them while they're at soccer practice or something, I can actually take this with me. So it's one of the reasons why I like this technique when I first learned it. So I'm just going to add a little pink. Now, of all the colors that I tested so far, the pink was the only one that I had trouble actually getting going. Now it seems fine. I think maybe I didn't use as heavy a hand as I would have liked on the last go around. Let's give him a little yellow tie there. It's not looking very yellow. Maybe I need a little more yellow there. And one thing I have to say is I have been playing around with watercolor pencils, and my husband had given me a different brand for Christmas that I have been playing with, and I wasn't loving them. I thought maybe I just hated using colored pencils altogether. I actually liked the Crayola watercolor pencils better than the brand I was using, because they weren't very creamy when I was trying to, like, create palettes or put them on the card. So I really like that these particular ones feel pretty creamy. All right, so now I'm just gonna add a little, another bit of color. In the places where I'd like, oops, I just got that in his pink cheek. See if I can get that out of there. It's a beautiful thing about watercoloring. You can add a little water and you can get rid of a mistake like that. Or a blob of water. That's my only complaint about the aqua pens, is sometimes I end up with a blob of water in a place I don't want them. I've actually started to really enjoy using paintbrushes. And I'm not going to fuss with this too much, really, because, you know, he's very cute. Wow, I can hear the rain beating against the... I'm actually in the basement and I can hear the rain pouring down. It's just pouring here. So that's one kind. That's like creating a palette on a piece of watercolor paper. Now I've also seen people scribble it onto their Teflon mat or onto a clear block. Like usually you end up putting water down first. But I've seen people do that too. I always do this. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to have this to use again. So I don't know. It's like one of my favorite techniques. Now, a second way to use them is to use them directly on your project. So let's say I want to color this in with my watercolor pencil. I'm going to just color the parts that I want to be the darkest. And then I'm going to use my aqua painter or a wet paintbrush, like whatever you're most comfortable using, that's what you should use. I really am falling in love with my paintbrushes lately. I feel like I have more control over the water with the paintbrush, so I've been enjoying that. And I'm just putting a little bit of color on. I'm not filling in all the parts, because now I'm going to take my aqua painter, make sure that's wet, and then I'm going to start going around and smoothing that out. And getting rid of some of the lines that I actually have in there. And filling in the bare spots. And this is actually, I find that by coloring, putting the pencil down where I want it to be the darkest, and then using my wet aqua painter to kind of smooth that color out and then spread the color around where I don't have it, I actually find that I get nice shading with this. Okay, so as I was putting my video together, I realized that you couldn't see anything I did because I was out of the shot as I was doing it. So I'm going to redo this part. I ended up with this card. The first mouse was the one that I used the separate palette for. And here's my palette. And you can see my palette's dry now. I will keep this, and then I can just reactivate these colors with water and I can paint with this again. So that's a great way to use your pencils. The second one is where I color directly onto the paper and then just use my aqua painter or my aqua brush or my water brush, whatever kind you have, and just spread out the color a little bit. And then the third kind is the kind that I want to show you. This one I think is one of my favorite ways to do it because you get really good results, and I just like the way it turns out. I think it's kind of fun. And I learned this with one of the classes I took through Alta New Academy. It was called Beautiful Details. And the instructor was just an amazing colorist in all forms of mediums, but she used this technique to add really fine details to beautiful floral images. But it can also be used to color something like this. Now when she did it to add fine details, she used a really super thin liner brush, so like that can be done as well. So I'm just going to wet the end, and then I'm going to just run my brush like this along the end on the pencil, tip on the colored part, and you can see if I hold this up here, can you see all of the ink that I now have transferred to my my water brush? So now when you put this directly on, you get quite a bit of color, and it's pretty amazing. And as you use it, the color sort of waters down a little bit, or you can wipe it off and add some water, and then you can pull this color down to the rest of your image, so it automatically sort of shades it for you. And you can pull this in. I'm going to take some of this water off. I'm going to dry my brush a little bit and take some of this water off. So there we go. And then I'm going to take a little bit more, get a little bit more color here to color in the other parts I want to have brown. And as I let this dry, like I did with the first kind, the way I use the palette, I can always come back in and make parts of this darker if I want to. Now all of these techniques that I'm using are really, I'm adding wet paint to dry paper. You could also do it the other way. You could add the wet paint to wet paper and get a whole different color. So let me take some red here. Now one of the things, I don't know if you noticed when I held up my other card, I have splashes of red and black and blue in there, and that came from this technique. I was holding it over this, and as you do this, notice that it splashes. So you want to, if you're doing this and you don't want those splashes, make sure you're not adding the color over the pencil. But this is a really great way to add splashes to your project as well. So I'll just fill in the red. I'm going to wipe it down, add a little bit of water, and then just sort of pull out the color. So it sort of just does a little shading for me by pulling out the color from one side to the other. Okay. And when I'm all done with my aqua painters or my water brushes, I actually take them to the sink and I unscrew this and I just run water through the brush, and it actually takes off most of the color. Sometimes I can't always get the color off. I just realized I forgot a part of the ear here. But as long as the water is coming out of it clear, it won't affect the rest of my project if it stains the brushes. But usually I just have to take it and run it under the water. Okay. And then I want to add some pink touches. I think this is a super fun technique, and I imagine it takes a lot of practice to, get enough paint on there to add some fine details. But boy, I'll tell you, with that class that I took, oops, I just put that in the puddle of water. The artistic details that she was able to add with this technique in a fine thin liner brush were just stunning. Like it really highlighted some of the places that she wanted to highlight. Okay, now I want to just make sure I show you the second technique again, because I was a little bit out of the, or a lot out of the shot. So the second one was where I added the the colored pencil right directly onto the project and then pulled the color out with the wet brush. Now, of course, my shading is going to be in a whole different direction. I'm going to add a little bit more red there. I'll try combining techniques there. I want that to, there we go. So I've kind of combined the two techniques there, and maybe I'll do the same thing with the leaf and add some yellowy green in there. I really like these pencils. Like, I'm surprised at the difference between these pencils and the other brand I was using. So pencils do make a difference, and the other thing that makes a huge difference is your paper. Like, your paper makes a huge difference. Now, the only other thing I want to add is I like some black splotches. My daughter was picking on me about the red splotches. She thought it looked like blood spatter. So I'm going to add some black splotches and make it look not so much like, you know, blood spatter. But anyways, there you go. So that completes my video, and you can see how I completed this card here. I just added some, these are iridescent sequins from Studio Katia. The sentiment came with the second waffle flower stamp set that coordinated with the sweet set here. And this is heat embossed in white. This is just stamped in black, just keeping it simple. I'm going to make a card out of this too, because that little gal is kind of cute also. But there's 3 different ways you can use your pencils, and it's always a great way to use your pencil. One final detail, I added some grass below, and I did that. I decided out of the 3 techniques, my favorite was this one. So I wanted to sort of ground her so she didn't look like she was just like floating in the middle of the air. So I just took some and just kind of scribbled it around her. And it actually is a quick and easy way to add some background. And I could add a little blue around the edge too. Let's take the light blue and do a very similar thing. Around the outside edge, because it's always fun. You can do around the whole edge, and some of my paint is still, my splitters are being reactivated. This is probably a step I should do before the splitters, but you know, the splitters kind of happened accidentally when I wasn't thinking about it enough. Like, oh, that's going to be an issue. I'm going to water this out a little bit in just a minute. Make this guy look like it's part of the scene. And don't forget to make sure if you're using the hybrid ink that you make sure you're giving it time to dry. And that's going to complete my second card. I'll just put it on a card base, give it a sentiment of some kind, and call that a day. But just to give you an idea of how you can use those pencils, this works with Crayola watercolor pencils, and it's back to school season. So those Crayola watercolor pencils are pretty inexpensive, and this is actually something kids would love to do too, so you could teach them any one of those 3 techniques. So I hope you give that a try. Stop on my blog at stampingimperfection.com, give this video a thumbs up, and like and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching.